Ferris intro. Before you waste your life, I want to invite you into an honest pause. Not a pause filled with guilt or fear or pressure to become someone else overnight, but a pause rooted in awareness. Most people don't lose their lives in one dramatic moment. They lose them slowly, quietly, through disconnection. Disconnection from their feelings, from their bodies, from their truth. We live on autopilot, chasing approval, productivity, and survival, while something essential inside us is waiting to be acknowledged. This sermon is not about blaming you for where you are. It's about understanding how you learn to live the way you do, and gently asking whether that way is still serving you. Because the greatest waste of life is not failure, it is unconsciousness. 5 keynotes. 1. Disconnection is the first way we waste our lives. 2. Pain we don't feel controls us. 3. Who you became was a survival strategy. 4. Awareness creates choice. 5. Responsibility begins with compassion. Expanded keynote. No. 1. Disconnection is not something that suddenly happens when life falls apart. It is something that often begins very early, long before we have language for it. As children, we are wired for connection. Our nervous systems are shaped by the emotional environment around us. When love, safety, and acceptance are consistent, we stay connected to ourselves. When they are conditional, unpredictable, or absent, we adapt. An adaptation, while necessary for survival, often comes at the cost of authenticity. We learn to disconnect, not because we are weak, because it works. It keeps us safe, accepted, and functioning in environments that may not have had space for our full emotional truth. Over time, this disconnection becomes normalized. We stop noticing it. We stop asking ourselves what we feel and start asking what is expected. We stop listening to our bodies and start overriding them. Fatigue becomes normal. Anxiety becomes background noise. Numbness becomes mistaken for strength. And society rewards this. We praise people for pushing through pain, for being productive at any cost, for staying busy enough to never have to sit with themselves. But a life lived in disconnection is not a fully lived life. It is a life managed, endured, and performed. When you are disconnected from yourself, you may still succeed, but the success feels strangely empty. You may achieve goals and still feel restless. You may be surrounded by people and still feel alone. This is because meaning does not come from achievement, it comes from alignment. And alignment is impossible without connection. If you are not in touch with your own emotional reality, you cannot know what truly matters to you. You end up living according to borrowed values, inherited fears, and unconscious patterns that were formed long before you had any choice in them. Disconnection also shows up in how we treat our time. We waste hours scrolling, distracting, consuming, not because we are lazy, but because being present feels uncomfortable. Presence brings us face to face with feelings we have avoided. Regret, grief, anger, longing. So we numb, we fill the silence, we stay busy, and slowly life passes by, not because we weren't alive, but because we weren't here. To be disconnected is to exist without inhabiting your own experience. The tragedy is that many people believe this is just how life is. They think exhaustion is adulthood. They think stress is ambition. They think emotional shutdown is maturity. But these are not signs of a full life. They are signs of a life lived in self-abandonment. Every time you ignore your inner signals, you reinforce the message that your authentic self is not welcome. And over time, that message becomes an identity. Reconnection begins with awareness, but awareness can feel threatening. When you start paying attention, you may notice how much you've been carrying. You may notice how often you say yes when you mean no. How often you silence yourself to keep the peace. How often you live for approval instead of truth. This can be painful. But pain is not the enemy. Disconnection is. Pain is a signal that something inside you wants to be acknowledged. Before you waste your life does not mean rush, fix, or transform yourself overnight. It means slow down enough to feel. It means questioning the automatic ways you live, the habits that drain you, the relationships that require you to disappear. It means asking, gently and honestly, where you learn to disconnect from yourself and whether you are willing to begin listening again. Not to judge what you find, but to understand it, because understanding is the doorway back to wholeness. Pain we don't feel does not disappear. It does not dissolve with time, success, or distraction. It simply goes underground. And when pain goes underground, it doesn't become weaker. It becomes more powerful, because now it operates without our awareness. What we avoid feeling ends up shaping our behavior, our choices, our relationships, and even our bodies. We think we are in control, but much of what we do is actually driven by old emotional wounds that were never given space to be acknowledged. From a very early age, many of us learned that certain emotions were not welcome. Maybe anger was punished. Maybe sadness was ignored. Maybe fear was dismissed. So we adapted. We learned to swallow what we felt in order to belong, to be loved, to stay safe. This was not a failure on our part. It was intelligence. But what once protected us can later imprison us. The pain we could not feel as children becomes the pain that controls us as adults. Unfelt pain shows up as reactivity. You overreact to small things and don't understand why. You feel triggered by situations that seem minor, but carry an emotional charge far beyond the present moment. That charge is not about now, it is about then. The nervous system remembers what the mind has buried. When pain is not consciously felt, it seeks expression through irritation, anxiety, compulsive behavior, or emotional shutdown. You think you are responding to the present, but you are reliving the past through the body. Unfelt pain also drives addiction, not only to substances, but to behaviors. Overworking, overeating, scrolling endlessly, chasing validation, staying busy, staying numb. These are not moral failures. They are attempts at regulation. They are efforts to soothe something that was never soothed. When you don't allow yourself to feel pain, you look for relief everywhere else, and relief becomes a substitute for healing. Temporary, repetitive, and never quite enough. There is a cost to this avoidance. When pain controls us, it narrows our lives. We choose familiarity over truth. We stay in relationships that hurt because they feel known. We avoid risks not because they are dangerous, but because they might awaken feelings we've learned to suppress. We mistake emotional avoidance for stability, but a life organized around avoiding pain is not a free life. It is a constrained one. The body keeps the score. Chronic stress, tension, fatigue, illness often carry emotional histories within them. This does not mean pain is imagined. It means it is intelligent. The body speaks when the mind refuses to listen. When we ignore emotional pain, it often translates into physical symptoms, forcing us to pay attention in ways we can no longer avoid. The question is not why the body breaks down, but why it had to speak so loudly to be heard. Feeling pain does not mean drowning in it. It does not mean being overwhelmed or stuck in the past. Feeling pain means allowing it to move through awareness instead of controlling us from the shadows. Pain, when felt in a safe and compassionate way, has a beginning, a middle, and a transformation. Pain that is avoided becomes chronic. Pain that is welcomed becomes information. Many people fear that if they open the door to pain, it will consume them. But pain that is met with presence tends to soften. It asks for attention, not annihilation. What overwhelms us is not pain itself, but the loneliness of holding it alone. When pain is witnessed, even by ourselves, it begins to loosen its grip. Awareness does not eliminate pain, but it removes its power to dictate our lives unconsciously. When you start to feel what you once avoided, you may notice grief for the life you didn't get to live, the safety you didn't receive, the parts of yourself you had to abandon. This grief is not weakness. It is reconnection. It is the nervous system learning that it is finally safe to tell the truth. And truth, even when painful, is liberating. Before you waste your life, you must understand this. Whatever you refuse to feel will decide for you. It will choose your habits, your partners, your limits, and your future. Feeling pain is not what breaks you. Avoiding it is what keeps you trapped. When pain is brought into awareness, it stops being a dictator and becomes a messenger, pointing you toward what needs care, honesty, and compassion. Who you became did not happen by accident. It was not random, and it was not a flaw in your character. It was an intelligent response to the conditions you were given. Every personality trait you developed, every habit you rely on, every emotional pattern you repeat began as a way to survive. Before it became your identity, it was a strategy, and it worked. It kept you connected, protected, and functioning in a world that may not have known how to meet you as you truly were. As a child, you did not have the power to change your environment. You could not choose your caregivers, their emotional availability, their wounds, or the stresses they carried. What you could do was adapt. If love was conditional, you learned to perform. If emotions were unsafe, you learned to suppress them. If chaos was present, you learned to stay alert. If you were unseen, you learned to become self-sufficient. These adaptations were not conscious decisions. They were nervous system responses. Your body and mind did what they had to do to belong, because belonging was essential for survival. The problem is not that these strategies existed. The problem is that we often mistake them for who we are. The coping mechanisms that once protected us become fixed identities. The people pleaser believes they are kind when they are actually afraid of abandonment. The overachiever believes they are driven when they are actually seeking safety through approval. The emotionally distant person believes they are independent when they once learned closeness was dangerous. These patterns are not moral failures. They are stories of adaptation written into behavior. Over time, survival strategies can become prisons. What once kept you safe begins to limit you. The vigilance that protected you from unpredictability turns into chronic anxiety. The emotional numbness that spared you from pain turns into an inability to feel joy. The self-reliance that helped you cope turns into isolation. And because these strategies feel familiar, we defend them. We justify them. We build entire lives around them. Letting go of them can feel like a threat, not because they are healthy, but because they are known. This is why change can feel terrifying even when we want it. When you try to grow, your nervous system does not ask, "Is this good for me?" It asks, "Is this familiar?" Growth often feels unsafe because it challenges the strategies that once ensured survival. Healing is not just about learning new behaviors. It is about reassuring the parts of you that believe change equals danger. Without compassion, transformation becomes another form of self-violence. Understanding that who you became was a survival strategy allows you to replace shame with curiosity. Instead of asking, "What's wrong with me?" you begin to ask, "What happened to me?" You begin to see your patterns not as defects, but as evidence of resilience. You survived, and survival required sacrifice. Often, the sacrifice was authenticity. You had to mute certain emotions, suppress needs, or abandon parts of yourself to stay connected to others. But survival is not the same as living. Many people remain loyal to survival strategies long after the danger has passed. They live as if the past is still happening. Their bodies stay braced. Their minds stay guarded. Their hearts stay cautious. And life becomes smaller, not because they lack potential, but because they are still organized around old threats. The tragedy is not that these strategies existed, it is that they go unexamined. Awareness begins to loosen their grip. When you recognize that a pattern once served you, you no longer need to fight it. You can thank it. You can understand it. And only then can you decide whether it still belongs in your life. Letting go of a survival strategy does not mean betraying yourself. It means updating your internal system to match your current reality. You are no longer the child you were. You have more resources now, more choice, more capacity. Who you became helped you get here. But who you are becoming requires something different. It requires safety instead of vigilance, presence instead of performance, truth instead of adaptation. And that transition takes patience. Parts of you will resist. They will cling to the familiar. They will warn you of danger that no longer exists. Listening to them without obeying them is part of the work. You are not here to erase your past self, but to integrate it, to honor its effort while gently guiding it toward a life that is no longer just about surviving. Awareness creates choice, because without awareness, there is only reaction. Most of what we call decision making is actually habit playing itself out. We think we are choosing, but we are repeating. We follow emotional grooves carved by past experiences, responding the same way not because it is right, but because it is familiar. Awareness interrupts this loop. It slows things down just enough for something new to become possible. When you are unaware, your nervous system runs the show. Old fears, unmet needs, and unprocessed pain dictate your responses before your conscious mind ever arrives. You snap, shut down, over-explain, avoid, please, numb out, or push harder, and afterward you wonder why you did it again. In those moments, there was no choice, only momentum. Awareness is the moment you notice what is happening while it is happening. That noticing is not passive. It is powerful. Awareness does not mean analyzing yourself endlessly or judging every thought. It means sensing, feeling your body, recognizing emotional signals, catching the tightening in your chest before the outburst, the urge to escape before the distraction, the familiar pull toward approval before you abandon yourself. This noticing creates space, and space is where choice lives. Without space, behavior is automatic. With space, response becomes possible. Many people fear awareness because they think it will be painful. And yes, awareness can bring discomfort because it reveals truths we have avoided. But unawareness is far more costly. It keeps us trapped in patterns we did not consciously choose. Awareness does not add pain, it exposes what is already there. The difference is that once something is seen, it no longer has to control us from behind the scenes. Choice does not mean control over everything. It means participation. It means you are no longer merely acted upon by your past. You may still feel the same emotions, the same impulses, the same fears, but now you can meet them with understanding instead of obedience. Awareness allows you to say, this is anger, not danger. This is fear, not truth. This is an old story, not the present moment. With awareness, responsibility becomes possible without becoming harsh. You stop blaming yourself for having certain reactions and start taking responsibility for how you relate to them. You recognize that feelings arise, but actions follow awareness. You cannot choose what shows up inside you, but you can choose how you respond once you see it clearly. That is real power, quiet and steady, not forceful. Awareness also reveals the cost of unconscious living. You begin to notice how often you betray your own needs, how often you rush past moments that matter, how often you live for later instead of now. This is not meant to shame you. It is meant to wake you up. You cannot change what you do not notice. Awareness is the light that makes change possible, not by force, but by clarity. As awareness deepens, life becomes less reactive and more intentional. You pause more. You listen more. You act with greater alignment, not because life is suddenly easy, but because you are present. Presence does not remove difficulty, it removes confusion. You begin to recognize the difference between what is happening and what you are telling yourself about what is happening. That distinction alone can transform how you live. Before awareness, life happens to you. After awareness, life happens with you. The same circumstances, the same challenges, but a different relationship to them. You are no longer sleepwalking through your days, driven by unseen forces. You are awake enough to participate, to respond, to choose again and again, not perfectly, but consciously. Responsibility begins with compassion, because without compassion, responsibility turns into punishment. Most people confuse responsibility with self-blame. They believe that to take responsibility means to be harsh, critical, and unforgiving toward themselves. But blame does not create change. It creates fear, and fear never leads to healing. It only reinforces the very patterns we are trying to escape. When compassion is absent, responsibility becomes unbearable. You look at your habits, your mistakes, your limitations, and instead of understanding them, you attack yourself for having them. This inner hostility does not motivate growth. It activates the same stress responses that created the patterns in the first place. A nervous system under threat cannot learn, it can only defend. Compassion is not a luxury in this process. It is the foundation. Compassion does not mean excusing harmful behavior or avoiding accountability. It means understanding context. It means recognizing that every behavior has a reason, even if that reason is no longer valid. When you approach yourself with curiosity, instead of judgment, you create the conditions where responsibility can actually be taken. You stop asking, "Why am I like this?" and start asking, "What is this trying to protect me from?" True responsibility is the ability to respond rather than react. But you cannot respond wisely to something you are busy condemning. Compassion slows the process down. It allows you to stay present with discomfort without needing to escape or attack yourself. In that presence, insight emerges. You begin to see how your actions are connected to your history, your nervous system, your unmet needs. This seeing does not remove responsibility, it deepens it. Many people avoid responsibility because they associate it with shame. They believe that if they admit their role in their suffering, they will collapse under the weight of self-judgment. So they externalize blame or remain stuck. Compassion changes this equation. When you know you will meet yourself with kindness, it becomes safe to look honestly at your behavior. Safety makes honesty possible. Compassion also expands responsibility beyond the individual. You begin to see how your wounds affect others, not as a reason for guilt, but as an invitation to heal. You recognize that unhealed pain does not stay contained. It spreads through relationships, families, and generations. Taking responsibility with compassion means saying, "I did not choose my wounds, but I can choose how I relate to them now." Without compassion, responsibility becomes rigid. You demand perfection. You expect immediate change. You become intolerant of setbacks. This rigidity is not strength, it is fear in disguise. Compassion allows flexibility. It acknowledges that change is a process, not an event. You can hold yourself accountable while still being patient with your nervous system's pace. When compassion is present, responsibility becomes empowering. You are no longer fixing yourself because you are broken. You are caring for yourself because you matter. That shift changes everything. Actions taken from self-respect are sustainable. Actions taken from self-contempt are not. Compassion keeps you engaged when the work gets uncomfortable, when old patterns resurface, when progress feels slow. Responsibility that begins with compassion also changes how you relate to others. You stop projecting blame and start setting boundaries. You stop rescuing and start relating honestly. You stop reacting from wounds and start responding from awareness. Compassion creates clarity, and clarity allows responsibility to be lived, not enforced. Before you waste your life, understand this. You cannot hate yourself into wholeness. Responsibility is not about carrying guilt for who you've been. It is about caring enough to show up differently now. Compassion is what makes that possible. Without it, responsibility is just another burden. With it, responsibility becomes an act of self-respect, a commitment to living consciously, gently, and truthfully in the time you have.